I absolutely love driving my MX-5. Every time I take it out, even if it's just to go to the shops or see my friends, I enjoy every single drive. And I've driven Subarus and AMGs, but I can genuinely tell you now, I just enjoy driving my car more than anything. To be fair, I absolutely loved driving an SW20 MR2. That is, I don't know what it is, them cars are so much fun. But yeah, I love driving my Mazda. It's 21 years old, you know, so it's an old car, but it is so much fun to drive. And to be fair, the new Mazda MX-5, you know, the ND does still keep the same sort of, you know, personality about the car. But I actually recently went to test drive one because I've been thinking of changing mine to a newer car. Of course, there are so many cars I want, but you know, it just makes more sense. You know, they're newer, they're more reliable. It makes a lot more sense. But if I'm being honest, it just wasn't as fun. It was still a fun car to drive, but it wasn't as fun as my NB. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot faster. You know, this ND was a lot faster than my NB. Of course it was. You know, it was a 2-litre. And it was not, the interior was really nice, it was really modern, but it genuinely wasn't as fun. I'm not just saying that. I did not have as much fun as I usually do, which is in my, you know, in my Mark II, my NB. And to be honest, I've driven an NA, I've driven a Mark 1, and that's even more fun than a Mark II. That they're even more raw, and they're even more fun to drive. But I started wondering why, you know, why are these new sports cars just aren't as fun? They're not as interesting. And it's weird because I really, you know, I do really like the ND. I still really enjoy driving that car. It's still it's still a lot more fun than most cars on the road. But a lot of newer sports cars now, they're just not as they're not as fun. For example, when the new Supra came out, obviously that's such, you know, that was such an iconic car back in the day. The Mark IV is such an icon. I mean, without a doubt, I don't want to sound basic, but it's one of my dream cars. I think most car guys, you know, if you're into your JDM cars or you're into your Japanese cars in general, you know, the Supra is up there. You know, one of the most iconic interiors with a legendary engine, the 2JZ, you know, it's so legendary. And I know, you know, it's kind of unfair to say because the new Supra, it's basically a BMW Z4, and it came in an automatic, and they did eventually make it a manual or have the option to get a manual. But man, this car just, it's not as exciting as the first. And I remember watching a donut video on this car, and basically they go on to explain how the new Supra is just too good. It's too perfect. Real quickly, 90% of you guys are currently not subscribed, so please help me out with them numbers and subscribe. You know, it's free and you can always unsubscribe at any time. Anyway, back to the video. I think one of the big things to address with newer sports cars is the fact that they are just too good. They are just too good. Cars in general now are so overly refined, and I don't think this is a totally bad thing, because of course, you know, technology has got a lot, you know, it's got a lot better than what it was 30 years ago. I mean, you think about what a computer was like 30 years ago to what it is now, like it's, the difference is so huge. And of course, cars are going to change as well. They're going to become a lot better, but that doesn't always equal more fun. And it's hard because I guess this is subjective. You know, a lot of people may prefer having a super automated, perfectly driving machine, like that might be their thing. But I do believe most car enthusiasts, you know, we like our cars having a little bit of personality. You know, if you go back into the, you know, the early 2000s, where I genuinely think the 90s and the 2000s was the golden era for sports cars, you had things like the Dodge Viper, right, which was completely and utterly, I mean, terrifying, and it wasn't refined at all. It was rear-wheel drive with an American V10 in the front, and it was just a ridiculous car. And the thing, you know, did try and kill you, but you just wouldn't have that now. You know, there's something so cool about that. And I'm not saying a car trying to kill you is cool, but what I'm saying is they all had personality. They weren't perfect. They were these machines that you had to respect. And I feel like if they made a Dodge Viper now, for example, it just wouldn't be as fun. It would probably be more powerful, but it just wouldn't be as fun. It'd be dulled down. I think a good example of this is the old M5 compared to the new M5. You know, the E39, you know, 4.9 litre V8, around 400 brake horsepower, really fun, you know, 6-speed manual, really fun to drive, really raw. I mean, especially the E60, you know, M5 with the V10, absolutely ridiculous car, but it had its own personality and it was raw. Whereas now the G90, yes, it does have a V8, yes, it is super fast and it makes over 700 brake horsepower, but it does, you know, I remember watching a video of Richard Hammond driving one, and he said it was like driving a robot. But basically he goes on to describe how there's a loss of feel and driver feedback, which ultimately made the old M cars so good because they felt analog. They felt like sports cars, even though you had 4 doors. But because of all the driving aids and, you know, the ABS, and they're all good things, they keep you safe. but they're just nowhere near as fun anymore because, you know, the car feels like it's doing all the work for you, which at the end of the day isn't really, the engagement isn't there. And that kind of brings me on to my next point. Also, I know I've definitely triggered a few people by saying the M5 is a sports car. I know it's a sports saloon or a super saloon, whatever you want to call it, but you get what I mean. Anyway, as I was saying, cars, sports cars especially, are just a lot heavier now. And when a sports car is lighter, it is more fun. It just is. To be fair, one thing I do like about the ND, the new MX-5, is it is only around 50 to 100 kg heavier than the NA. But with all the computers, the safety regulations, all that kind of thing, cars are just heavier now. You know, they are a lot more heavier than they used to be. This usually means that they're also bigger as well, which overall just, you know, they're not as fun. They're nowhere near as fun. That's why cars like the MX-5 and the MR2 are so good. Cars like the Lotus Elise, that's why they're so much fun, is because they practically weigh nothing compared to a lot of other cars on the road. I mean, I do think another reason why a lot of cars and sports cars are a lot more heavier now is because the interior has to feel luxury for some reason. Like, you don't really get many cars now with that base, you know, interior. I mean, look at my old MX-5. Obviously, there's a POV of it on the screen right now. There is not much going on in there, and I know that, you know, technology was a lot older then, but in a lot of MX-5s, they have cloth seats. You know, they don't have heated seats. They don't even have AC. I know a lot of the NAs have winded up windows. You know, like there's nowhere near as much comfort features as there are now, and it's almost become like a necessity in a lot of cars. I feel like a lot of manufacturers feel like they have to put that in, but I do think it does come down to safety to why these, you know, are a lot heavier now. But lighter cars are just way more fun. They're, you know, the steering is so much more responsive. There's way more feedback, and I don't know what it is, but driving a lighter car is just more fun. And yes, I am kind of referring to, you know, the lightweight sports cars in this video, like the MX-5, like the MR2, like the GT86. But it's not just these sort of sports cars that have been affected. But look at the M cars, for example. I know we touched on the M5 earlier, you know, in this video, but you know, they all have went massively up in weight. It's not all bad though. You know, the GR86 and the MX, you know, the new MX-5 are really good lightweight sports cars. You know, they still have that kind of analog feel, and to be honest with you, they do it very well. However, I do feel like the next generation, and especially the next set of cars, I know the new MX-5 they're talking of keeping it fully combustion, but unfortunately I do think it's going to be the last lot of sort of, you know, lightweight sports cars there are. Proper combustion engine, you know, manual rear-wheel drive sports cars, which of course is a real shame, but you know, all good things I suppose must come to an end. But I mean, overall, a sports car is meant to be a driver-focused car. They're not meant to be particularly fast, they're not meant to be, you know, particularly exotic, just fun to drive. I really do believe that's what a sports car is meant to be. Even the ones with a lot more power used to be a lot more fun, you know, like the M cars, or like the 350Z, or the Supra, the RX-7, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, if you did enjoy the video, please subscribe, it's free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.